Christian parenting.
Before we start today's episode, I'm excited to tell you about the chance you have right now to help keep the Living Wholehearted podcast going strong and encouraging you in your parenting journey. And that's by giving a donation to christianparenting.org. The Living Wholehearted podcast is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month. Besides producing podcasts like ours, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like you become the perfectly imperfect parents God created you to be. You know, Tara and I, on our podcast, we don't just talk about parenting. We talk about leadership in all its forms, but we will say that parenting, if you are a parent, is one of the most important leadership roles you could ever play.
So today, text CP GIVE to 474747 to make a generous donation. That's CP GIVE, GIVE, to 474747. And when you do, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, full of great parenting resources like the identity cards that encourage your kids about who they are in Christ, the Marked by Prayer prayer journal, and a $100 Amazon gift card. I mean, who doesn't want that? If you can set aside perfection and grow in the perfectly imperfect parent you were made to be, I know you want to make this message of hope and freedom to more moms and dads available. So please give generously today by texting CP GIVE to 474747. And that's CP GIVE to 474747 if you didn't catch that. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Christian parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So thank you for giving generously today.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. I still have an amazing guest with me, Olivia Pothoff. If you haven't listened to the last episode, you'll want to go back. We unpacked our journey this last year with the pandemic and all the social unrest, but particularly around a conference called Encourage 2020, now called Courageous Gathering. And Olivia was one of our incredible musicians and worship leaders. And I've invited her back because I want her to unpack a little bit more what it's like to lead, particularly in the world of music and worship. I find that those leaders have a unique bent and some unique struggles. So we're going to unpack that a little bit more. Welcome back, Olivia.
Thank you. So great to be here.
Well, Olivia, you are a mom of 3. You're hitting your 20-year anniversary, as you said in the last episode. And you are the pastor of worship at Journey Church outside of Portland, Oregon. And so culturally, that also sets the tone here as we talk. Tell us a little bit about your journey of becoming a worship pastor and how God led you into this.
Well, when I remember being around first grade, 5 or 6 years old, and, people would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? That timeless question. And I knew as a first grader that I wanted to sing about Jesus for my vocation. I didn't know the word vocation in first grade, but I knew that's what I wanted to do when I grew up. And but I also, at the same time, had this little check in my spirit that was like, if I say that to people, I want to be a singer when I grow up, which was also the time when every little boy wanted to be Michael Jordan. You kind of get that response, oh, that's sweet, honey. But I had this feeling that was egotistical and prideful. And that wrestling of saying what I think God has made me to do, designed me from before the foundations of the earth to do, and then wrestling with self-promotion has been a struggle my whole life, for sure.
Yeah, that is part of the unique piece of being anyone that's up front, whether you're the teacher, the speaker, the writer, the singer. And so talk about that. Like did anyone say anything to you, or how did you all of a sudden have that internal
Yeah.
check that's like, ooh, this could be about ego or self-promotion
Right.
and pride versus a call and a design that God made? Like,
That's such a good question. I don't remember anyone saying anything. I think it was just a perceived notion I had that if you put yourself out there and even, I guess, declaring I'm good enough to be a professional singer, um, says something about pride or ego. And so I just assumed that so I would actually lie really and tell people I wanted to be a veterinarian.
you would lie.
I did. It's terrible.
That's much better than pride.
And then my sweet cat had to be put down to sleep. And I have this memory of driving into the vet's office and my mom saying, the kitty's going to go to sleep. And I put everything together. I was like, oh my gosh, the vet has to, do this. And I thought I need a new backup plan. And, so it's even interesting because I save a lot of stuff. I'm super sentimental. And I was going through this box of papers I'd written in college that I still have. And in one of the sentences, we had to write about calling. And I wrote, even, as like a 19-year-old, that I wanted to pursue singing in some ministry format. And my professor wrote, this was a handwriting back in the day before Google Classroom and all that. He wrote, a lofty goal.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's just very subtle tones that are giving that feedback. So fast forward in a culture now where it feels like anyone could be a professional singer, and yet the like quality I'm guessing is way high. I'm not a singer, but I just watched The Voice and I'm like, holy mackerels, it gets better and better every time. So how do you know if it's your gift or if it's a lofty dream? Like, how do you know in this profession?
Right. Oh, man. Especially in the day of auto-tune and all the things you can, I feel like nowadays you can take like a tone deaf person in the studio, do so much surgery,
That's true, huh?
I mean, it's real. Yeah, that's a $1 million question. I think, if you're singing as a straight performer or versus singing to be a conduit and a vehicle of worship, I would have two different answers, I guess, for you.
Yeah, well, answer both.
Because there's a big difference for people, when I'm looking for someone, recruiting someone, I would say, for a worship team, for example. I have like this bullet point list of like kind of character qualities and things I'm looking for. And some of that is musical competency. Like, can you sing harmony on the fly to any,
No.
and any part, soprano, alto, tenor, because we don't need 20 people singing the melody all day. But, do you know your Bible? I think the worship leader has become synonymous with a lot of things. And, even when I listened, to a lot of worship music, and I was trying to learn this song a couple of years ago. So I was watching the live performance, which even that now I watch with a different lens because there's so many stems and tracks and things, and you're like, this isn't quite live. But I was watching this, and they had all the things, the lights and the fog machine and the people's hair blowing, and my daughter, who was younger at the time, said, I don't know how I feel about that, Mom. And she didn't, in her child language, I was like, I want to be like, tell me more. Like, there was something about it that felt artificial and I think just self-promoting. And you're like, I sometimes wonder, would I still want to do my job if we were in the back of the room? That's a question I feel like we need to all be asking.
That's a good question. Explain it. Like, what do you think that does in terms of checking motivation or kind of getting things aligned?
Mm-hmm. Well, I have this thing that I do. I mean, over the years, I have these little, like, I guess, a litany of like tests to run through my brain to check, am I veering at all into ego land? And so one of those is like, Olivia, if you lost your voice today, would you still worship Jesus the same way? I knew someone who on a lawnmower accident lost some of their fingers. I'm like, because I play keys, I play piano. If some of my fingers were cut off, how would I feel about worship? Would I still worship with as much of a whole heart? If I couldn't do that. there are some questions about that. And so it's a very fine line, I think. And I'm sure in the speaking world, because I do preaching and teaching too, but I've done more music, and there's a very fine line when you start to exalt self above everything else. But I think you also have to have enough maturity to know when that's happening,
Yeah.
I lost my voice a few years ago because I was over singing, and then I was in danger. I went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he's like, "Do you want to sing when you're 60?" And I was like, "Yes." He's like, "How important is this to you?" I was like, "Very." And he's like, "Then you need to stop right now in my doctor's office, stop talking for 2 weeks and not even whisper, because that's actually worse." And it was a very introspective 2 weeks of reevaluating for me, like my motives.
Well, I think that even just thinking about that as a musician and a worship leader and expanding that upon to all kind of leadership and giftings, to recognize we're running a marathon and pacing ourselves, checking our ego and checking in maybe with our expertise, like if I couldn't, ...
Right.
I've had to check that. I mean, for a lot of times people box us in, right? On whatever. So I wear a lot of different hats. Sometimes you're going to get my counselor hat. Sometimes I'm an executive coach, which are 2 different hats. Sometimes I'm a speaker.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm an author, which is a newer one for me to put on. But that has a funny response from people. Sometimes I'm just a mom. Like, I don't want to be any of those in the room. I just want to be the mom raising my hand saying, hey, like, I'm concerned as a mom. And there's things that people box us in. Do you ever feel that as a worship leader? Like, is it a good box? Is it not a good box?
Yeah, I really am grateful for the job I have right now because, and I tell my husband this, I feel like our lead pastor sees me so holistically and doesn't just see me as Olivia the singer.
Great. Okay. That's huge because that doesn't happen in a lot of organizations.
And so to get the chance, my master's is in teaching, my undergrad's in Christian ministry. So I love teaching. I love the word of God. And to have someone give you opportunities and not box you in and to see you as a whole person is really an amazing thing in leadership and in the church to have coming from the top. So I'm really grateful for that. But I have had experiences where people just peg me as Olivia the singer,
Well, I think it speaks to our nature to peg people based on what their giftings and not them as a person. And so whether we're leading people in our organizations and not pegging them into the function that they fulfill in the greater organization, or just even in your own view of yourself, that's not all you are as a worship leader, because that's where the ego can get, like if you lose your voice or if, your identity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are some of those rituals, those things? So you ask the question of yourself. You ask the question of those you invite onto the worship team of, do you know your word?
Yeah.
Can you harmonize? Your answer is yes. What else? What other things?
Yeah. Oh, I think the balance that I have to hold, that's like this tension. And I really would say, I would love to say I do it every time, but honestly, I don't like repetitive discipline, which is terrible because I need to be more disciplined, but I try to do it most times.
You're creative. Let it go.
Yes. And so I have this one hand of like, be humble. Remember this, you could lose this gift at any time, really, depending on what life throws at you, or lose opportunities, you just don't know. And then at the other side, because I have wrestled so much with self-promotion, and I would say I lost a good decade where I should have probably been more freed up to pursue the things God was calling me out of obedience and out of passion and all the things he's made me to be, because I was so afraid that people would perceive me as like a diva or, oh, you want to be, popular or whatever. I came up with all these things in my head. And I was like, why is it that someone who's like an accountant, for example, doesn't feel prideful saying, I help people with their taxes and finances?
That's a good point.
And I feel saying that, what I want to do is what is going on in my brain. And actually a Bono quote really helped free me up. He said, songwriting is birthed out of a deep desire to communicate. And so I think music, that God has made it our sonic thumbprint. Our voices are a sonic thumbprint. No one else has your voice, Tara, or my voice. Jesus longs to hear our God longs to hear his children's voices. And whether you're tone deaf or not, that doesn't matter. Like to sing to God is, other than loving, is one of the most given commandments in the Bible, like over 100 times where it says we're to sing to the Lord. And so when I guess this other hand is like being freed up to do what God's called me to. And like about a year and a half ago, I had this amazing experience where I was driving over the beautiful bridges in Portland, and I could see PGE Park in kind of the background, and which is, I think, is that called Providence Park now? PGE Park? Anyways, where the Timbers play. And I just out loud was like, Lord, I don't know why, but I feel like I just want to sing there. This sounds really crazy for someone who struggles with worrying about self-promotion. Yeah. And this weird prayer I just threw up, because I also was feeling like, is there an expiration date on me? Because our culture values youth. And it's weird that even at the time in my later 30s, I was wrestling with that, like feeling, am I expired in my 30s? Yeah. Like that's a terrible thing that our culture, that I would even be asking that, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of where my prayer was coming from. Am I like, are you done with me? Yeah. And so like about a month later, I get this call on my phone. And it's from the person who organizes the national anthem for the Timbers games. I actually thought it was a spam call, and I almost hung up expecting them to say, like, you want a Marriott vacation. and then I just let him keep talking, thankfully. And he was like, we got your number from the Blazers because I'd sung there. And he's like, I was just wondering if you'd be available on such and such a day to come sing before the Timbers game. And I was like, oh my gosh, I actually like kind of half prayed for this. And so fast forward, I go to the game. And, it was against like the previous year's championship team. So it was like a sold out game, 30,000 people. And I get down into, and it was also on national television. And it's all this prep for a 2-minute song. Like I was a nervous wreck that day. I think my husband and I got in a fight. I don't normally get nervous to sing. And so then when I do, I'm like, crap, this is bad. I'm nervous. You know what I mean? Like, am I going to forget words? This is not hard, Olivia. You know this song. And so I get on the field, they hand me the mic, and I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's like an electric, okay, so you know what I'm saying. But all this to say, and I have a point in all this, is I literally felt not an audible voice, but Jesus just saying, I made you to do this. Yeah. Go have fun. Just enjoy this moment. And it was like a weirdly spiritual moment in this like electric soccer stadium where I felt like so alive because I was doing something that God made me to do. And it was like I was 5 years old again. Like I'm a kid and I'm just going to have fun doing what God made me to do.
Oh, I love that, Olivia. It reminded me of Chariots of Fire.
Yes. I love that quote.
Had our 14-year-old watch it and she rolled her eyes like we're filling her in with all our favorite movies. But that idea of when I run, I feel his pleasure. When I sing, I feel his pleasure.
Yes.
That is actually, I think, a good marker for us of when we know we're in that like sweet spot. And it's a pull for all of us, I think, to either minimize that out of fear, particularly I think women, we'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. We tend to minimize, I think, our gifts out of a fear of making others feel less than or them thinking we're trying to self-promote. Yeah. Or the other side of all of a sudden, that's now our identity. And we don't know who we are apart from that. And so the sweet spot of staying in that 5-year-old little joy of he's delighting, have fun, enjoy this. And not all of it work. It's your vocation as well. It's not all fun, but at the same time to keep that posture at the forefront of all of our work as leaders and what we're called to, I think that is a beautiful picture.
PBS 1988 said this about the Living Wholehearted podcast. I love this podcast so much. Tara and Jeff are being used by God in a powerful way. They are knowledgeable, empathetic, and relatable. They are brave with their choice of topics and are addressing hard things that many Christians don't like to talk about. Well, thanks, PBS 1988. And you are just one of thousands of moms and dads who are being blessed every month through the Living Wholehearted podcast. Did you know this show is brought to you in part by our friends over at christianparenting.org? It's true. The Living Wholehearted podcast is part of the Christian Parenting Podcast Network, which is reaching over 500,000 moms and dads with trusted biblical guidance every month. And besides producing podcasts like ours, Christian Parenting also develops books, workbooks, prayer journals, and other practical tools to help parents like you become the perfectly imperfect parents God created you to be.
Today, we wanted to invite you to support this mission of creating more perfectly imperfect parents by giving a donation by texting CP Give to 474747. That's CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org. Every dollar you give reaches one more parent with trusted biblical guidance. So please give generously. And when you do, you'll be entered into a drawing to win the Perfectly Imperfect Parenting Bundle, full of great parenting resources like the identity cards that encourage your kids about who they are in Christ. I actually have those and use them regularly with our girls. The Marked by Prayer journal, and a $100 Amazon gift card. Christian Parenting is 100% donor funded and relies on listeners like you to support the future creation of parenting resources. So today, if you've been impacted by this podcast, please make a donation to the Christian Parenting by texting CP Give to 474747. That's CPGIVE to 474747. You can also give by visiting cpgive.org to reach more people like PVS 1988. Thank you. What's the issue particularly with musicians? I hear it in my office a lot. I hear it when I'm coaching women. I don't sing. I am married to a worship leader, and I just don't think men struggle in the same way. And if you're listening and you're a man and you struggle in this way, this is not a stereotypical thing. So listen in. But I've just observed that women tend to, there's this competitive or jealousy, or we just don't want to invite each other in. I don't know. Speak to that, because you know it more in the worship world or in the musician world.
Yeah. Like the things, the hang-ups maybe, or
the competitive or the like comparison.
Yes. Oh man. Sometimes, I mean, in my earlier, like in my 20s, I would say I felt so differently than I do now, which is, I guess, a good thing, because I think each decade we grow, hopefully, a little bit wiser and more mature in some of that. Because some like one of my favorite verses in all of the Bible is Romans 12:15, that says to mourn with those who mourn and to rejoice with those who rejoice. Some versions say weep with those who weep and celebrate with those who celebrate. And so if I could be known for one thing in this world besides loving Jesus, it would be, I want, like, at my funeral to say, like, Olivia did that.
Yeah.
Because I just think that's like such a hallmark of our faith, and to journey with people in both of those things. And it's sometimes easier to do the grieving part, but to do the celebrating part, like, that takes more, because it's hardest when it's something that you want yourself. To be the woman at the baby shower who's had infertility and loss and failed adoptions, and you're at your 30th baby shower buying a gift for somebody, right? There's so much in that, and grieving and celebrating simultaneously. And so, in the music world, it's so great to get to be at a point, and I actually shared this with Joy recently, because it's so awesome when you're like, yes, like you're literally, someone does an amazing run, or you get goosebumps, like Holy Spirit goosebumps from someone else's voice. And you're like, I am so grateful to be at that point where you can literally like root people on genuinely, not to look good, right? For perception of, oh, they're such a good friend and supporting, but like you really genuinely want to spur one another on. That's a really beautiful place to be. And I told Joy Haley, my friend, who we just did this duet mashup new song with, that I had a runner. I was a sprinter a long time ago, back in the day when I had fast twitch muscles. And she was from a different school. And every time in high school, I knew I was going to see her at a lot of track meets. And I would get this nervous feeling, because I was like, crap, I'm going to have to try really hard today, because we were like the same speed, and sometimes she'd beat me, sometimes vice versa. but she pushed me on to become a better runner. And I love that. And I told Joy, there's this sweet thing when we were singing together where it was like, I didn't think about competition. I didn't overanalyze my runs, or like, because we both sometimes will dumb down our singing to not be over powerful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to come off a show. It's amazing what you can do in just 2 seconds in your head of
Totally.
overthinking. And it was just, we were completely freed up to be the same person we would be when we're singing in the shower, singing at home, singing alone, worshiping the Lord, and not focused on all that stuff, you know?
Oh, I love it. So do you have any tips for someone who like they know they're made to do this? They're fearful of what people think, or being over showy, or wondering if they even have what it takes. What's the next step for them? You know, in terms of like, I'm parenting a girl who I know this is in her. I mean, she never stops singing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And she's belting it out. But if I was to put her or give her an opportunity to sing now at her age, she would say no. You know, there's that normal like,
yes.
So how do you help somebody translate whether they're 12 or they're 35?
Right.
From moving from singing in around the house to maybe I can give this an opportunity to serve.
Yes, absolutely. I tell young girls, because I've done a lot of vocal coaching with young girls, if you can sing in front of your peers, you can sing in front of anyone. It's actually, I think, scarier especially for, I would assume, women to sing in front of a group of people they know, like 30 people, than 30,000 strangers. And so if you can like even start with that, start with singing in front of your family, singing for things that aren't as big, you know. My dad would take me as a probably similar age to your daughter to the rescue mission in our town. And we would sing at like their chapel. And I mean, start with things like that. I would sing in nursing homes growing up, you know, things that maybe aren't as glamorous. And like, I don't know, and start with that. And then also I would say, you know, get some actual coaching. Ask people who are going to give you an honest answer, you know, and, you know, I listen to recordings of me as like a 12-year-old versus now. There is so many things. I mean, the voice is a muscle. And so if you're going to go run a marathon and run 26 some miles, right? Like you don't just decide to go do that. There's so much training. Like, you know, what is that quote about how many thousands of hours you spend?
10,000.
Thank you. Before you're an expert, right? I mean, that is true. And vocally, you know, I'm a different singer right now at this stage of life than I was in my early 20s for sure.
That's so good. And I appreciate the honesty. I feel like God's grace in my own life was giving me the honest feedback of a voice coach I took in college, and my husband, and both very lovingly telling me this was not your sweet spot. But honestly, I'm so grateful because it saved me from all the loving, doting people who told me I could sing.
Yeah.
I always joke I was a soloist in Madagascar. When I lived there for 4 months, and we would
I thought you meant the movie.
No, not in the movie.
You mean the real Madagascar?
No, I mean the real Madagascar in the boonies, in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
We would all lead worship, and then I would teach. I actually got to start teaching at 19, you know, and sharing from the Word, and but I also got to be a soloist, and I would sing, with my whole heart.
Yeah,
and they would come up, and honestly, I think at that time I thought I could sing. Now I laugh because it wasn't the truth in the sense of where I could go and what the call was on my life. And so I do think it's good to have truth tellers that'll be graceful with you, but you can also learn. But that's where the vocal coach was like, stick with the shower. And it saves me a lot. And I say it jokingly now. It doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I don't want to be singing. I would not feel the delight of singing up front. But I adore and watch. And I think it's important for every one of us that are listening to find that place where we come alive. It could be cooking in the kitchen. It could be writing in your journal, and you're like, there's something. And for me, it has been writing and speaking. And people go, how do you do it? I go, I don't know. It's and same kind of thing for you. How do you do that? Now, is there practice? Are there skills? Yes. But to find that, if it's numbers, accounting, I mean, that's incredible. So wherever that is, to find your sweet spot. Do we do things that we're not always good at? Yeah. But with leading and worship and the difference between doing it for the Lord and doing it for your own ego.
Yeah.
Is there any last word of wisdom that's kind of a principle you lived by that has gotten you to this place where you can be freed up?
Yes. Oh, I'm just so grateful for this age. Speaking of age, because my husband does this. He used to do this thing. He doesn't do it as much anymore. But when I was really wrestling with it, he would rank me after church, like after leading or any leading worship thing, from 1 to 10 on how genuine, on how much I was real Olivia, not on how good it sounded, right? Or any technical things. And sometimes, so we'd get in the car and be like 8.5. But because he knows how I am at home, right? Just in the living room without all the things going on in my head, all the worries and my blah, 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 my coming off this way. And so to be at this season now of just truly, genuinely worshiping, I mean, not to say those things don't creep in, but is a really, it's so freeing. And even my mom has said, like, you're a freer worship leader now than you were a decade ago, and that's a compliment. I want to be someone who leads and sings with my whole heart. And so, when I think about worship, the first mention of it ever in the Bible is when Abraham is tested, it says, by God to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, on an altar. And so you have this picture of him laying his most precious, prized possession, the thing he longed for so long, and then God coming through, providing the ram and sparing his life, and just this scene of, literally climbing up on an altar, offering everything you are. And then the first mention in the New Testament is when the Magi bring gifts to baby Jesus. And it says, and they brought this to worship him. So I think of like the first mention in its purest form of worship. And so I guess that's my visual I always want to have, is like, it's not, because image can supersede some of that and get in the way of genuine worship. And there's this old hymn that's actually almost 90 years old now, that George Beverly Shea, who sang for years with Billy Graham, he sang "I'd Rather Have Jesus." It's one of my, do you know this song? It's one of my favorite
You might have to sing
hymns. But it's not as well known as a lot of other hymns, but it's like one of my all-time faves. And in the second verse, it says, "I'd rather have Jesus than men's applause. I'd rather be faithful to his dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. I'd rather be true to his holy name." And so when I sing that, like at the top of my lungs, is belting it out, like that's my prayer. If I had to just have like my go-to words, what I sing right now. I could do it. I better back up so I don't like kill
Belt
these
it.
people right here.
Felt it. This is a good prayer. Listen as a prayer as you're wherever it is in your life, and whatever the call is that he's called you to, and the things that you are doing for Jesus, to set those aside and listen to these words and let it sink in.
I'd rather have Jesus than man's applause. I'd rather be faithful to his dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. I'd rather be true to his holy name than to be the king of a vast domain, or be held in sin's dread sway. I would rather have my Jesus than anything this world affords today.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.